The sun was sinking behind the quiet hills of Yokoyama, staining the clouds in shades of amber and violet, and the smell of sea salt drifted from the harbor into the narrow residential streets. Inside a modest two-story house on Sakura Lane, 12-year-old Ren Ishikawa sat at his desk, bent over a half-finished model of a drone. His room was cluttered with circuit boards, small screwdrivers, and notebooks filled with sketches of mechanical wings and handwritten formulas. On his wall hung a framed photo of his parents taken years ago at a cherry blossom festival. His mother's smile was soft and distant, like something that belonged to another world. She had died 3 years earlier in an earthquake that had leveled a part of the city, and since that day, Ren's world had narrowed to two constants: the gentle hum of his father's workshop and the nightly call that always came at 9 o'clock sharp. His father, Akihiro Ishikawa, was a man of quiet brilliance. At 47, he was one of the most respected engineers in Japan, known for designing complex security systems that protected power plants, research labs, and even government buildings. His inventions had made life safer for thousands, yet he remained humble, rarely appearing on television and preferring his modest home workshop to the glass towers of Tokyo. Ren idolized him, not for his fame, but for his patience, for the way he could explain the most complicated ideas in simple words, and for the promise he never broke. "I'll always call before I leave, Ren. Always." At precisely 9, the phone on Ren's desk buzzed and lit up. He smiled before answering. "Oda-san?" "I'm still at the factory, kiddo," came the warm, slightly tired voice. "The new prototype is giving me trouble. I might be home late." "That's okay," Ren said. "Don't forget to eat something." "I won't," his father chuckled. "Finish your homework and don't stay up too late building those drones. You'll have plenty of time for that when you're running my lab someday." Ren laughed softly. The ritual was comforting. They always ended the call the same way, his father reminding him that a promise is a bridge, not a word. When the call ended, Ren placed the phone back on the desk, feeling calm, safe, certain. Outside, the cicadas sang their endless song. He didn't know that it would be the last full conversation they would ever have, at least for a long time. The next morning began like any other. The news played softly in the kitchen while Ren buttered his toast. Miss Tanaka from next door was talking on the phone in a hushed, worried tone. The smell of miso soup filled the air. Then a headline on the television caught Ren's attention. "Explosion at Kurogawa Industrial Plant. 1 confirmed dead, several injured." He froze. The image on the screen showed the factory where his father worked, a mass of smoke and twisted steel. The anchor's voice was calm but grim. "Authorities have identified the deceased as Akihiro Ishikawa, senior engineer and co-founder of Kurogawa Systems." The world seemed to collapse around him. The spoon in his hand clattered against the table. He couldn't move, couldn't breathe. His mind refused to accept what his ears had heard. Akihiro Ishikawa, his father, dead. He ran out of the house, ignoring the calls of his neighbors, and sprinted toward the harbor where the black plume of smoke still rose into the sky. By the time he reached the cordoned-off area, police officers were already pushing people back. "No entry," one of them said firmly. "Go home, son." Ren stood behind the barrier, trembling. Through the smoke and flashing lights of ambulances, he saw stretchers being carried out, one of them covered completely by a white sheet. He tried to tell himself it wasn't real, that maybe they had made a mistake. His father always said mistakes happened when people rushed. Maybe the news had rushed. Maybe. That night, relatives began to arrive. His uncle Masato Ishikawa came first, tall, well-dressed, smelling faintly of expensive cologne. He was Akihiro's younger brother and the company's financial director. He spoke softly, his tone rehearsed. "Ren, your father was a great man. We'll make sure he's honored properly. The funeral will be soon. You must be strong." Ren looked up at him with wide eyes, but something in Masato's gaze felt off. Too calm, too efficient, like a man checking off a list. His words were kind, but his eyes were calculating. Ren said nothing. Later that evening, when everyone else was asleep, Ren sat alone at his desk, staring at his phone. He replayed the last call in his mind, the warmth in his father's voice, the promise. Then he remembered something strange. After the 9 o'clock call, there had been another one. It had rung twice, stopped, then nothing. He had thought it was a wrong number, but when he opened his phone's call log, the missed call was from his father's number. Time 22:15. Location saved automatically by the network Yokoyama Industrial Port. Not the factory. Ren's heart began to pound. His father had always called from the same place, from his office inside the plant. Why would there be another call an hour later from the port? He opened the message app. Nothing. No text, no voicemail, just silence. But his father's promise echoed in his mind. I'll always call before I leave. The next day, arrangements for the funeral began. Masato moved swiftly, speaking to officials, signing papers, organizing everything as though he had expected it. The body was identified through personal belongings, he told relatives. The explosion left no doubt. The funeral will be in 3 days. 3 days. Too soon, Ren thought. When his mother had died, it had taken nearly 2 weeks before the ceremony. His stomach twisted with unease. At night, he dreamed of his father trapped in the dark, reaching out, calling him from somewhere far away. The dream woke him in a cold sweat. On the third morning, he entered his father's study. It smelled faintly of metal and solder, just as it always had. The desk was tidy, the tools arranged with the precision of a man who hated chaos. Ren sat in his father's chair and turned on the computer. The login screen required a password. He typed in his birthday, then his mother's name. Nothing worked. On the fourth attempt, he tried Ren 21. The screen blinked and opened. A wave of bittersweet pride washed over him. He had guessed right. The computer was full of design files, blueprints, and encrypted folders. He clicked on one labeled Project Aurora. The system asked for another password. He sighed and moved to the email section. The latest message was from Masato, dated the night before the explosion. You're making this difficult, brother. Don't force my hand. Below it, a reply from his father. You can't take this technology and use it for profit. It's meant for safety, not control. I won't sign. Ren stared at the words until his vision blurred. Then the message ended abruptly. No more emails after that night. Something was terribly wrong. His father hadn't just died in an accident. There had been a fight, a disagreement about his invention. Ren's instincts, the same ones that made him good at puzzles, told him this wasn't over. He remembered his mother's favorite saying, "When your heart trembles, listen to it." That evening, Masato arrived again with the funeral director. The casket will be closed, he said briskly. The body was badly burned. It's better this way. Ren wanted to shout, to demand proof, but fear and confusion held him back. When Masato left, he sat in the dark living room, thinking of the missed call, the port, the strange message. There had to be something else, some sign his father left behind. And then he remembered the smartwatch. His father wore it every day. It tracked his heartbeat, his steps, his sleep. If the watch had survived, it would hold the final record of his father's life. At midnight, Ren slipped out of his room with a flashlight. The house was silent except for the distant ticking of a wall clock. He crept into the study again and opened the drawer where his father kept small tools. Beneath a set of screwdrivers lay a thin leather case. Inside it, to his shock, was the smartwatch, its screen cracked but intact. He pressed the power button. It flickered to life, showing a date and a heart rate reading. December 3rd, 72 beats per minute. The next entries made his stomach turn. 20:30, 160 BPM, 20:40, 48 BPM, 20:45 to 24 BPM. And then, instead of stopping, the readings continued. 21:1, 15 BPM, 21:10, 12 BPM, 21:15, 10 BPM, 21:20, signal lost. Ren stared at the numbers, his pulse thundering in his ears. If his father had truly died at 20:45, there shouldn't have been any readings after that. The watch had detected a weak, slowing heartbeat for nearly 40 minutes longer than the official time of death. He wasn't dead immediately. Maybe he hadn't died at all. A faint sound from the hallway made him jump. Footsteps. He turned off the flashlight and hid under the desk. The door creaked open, and through the crack of light he saw polished shoes. Masato's. The man muttered under his breath while rifling through drawers. Where did he keep it? The documents? The will? Ren held his breath. barely daring to move. Masato's phone rang. Yes, he whispered sharply. Everything is on schedule. The funeral's tomorrow. No, there won't be any problems. By Sunday, I'll have full control. Don't call again. The door shut. Ren waited until the footsteps faded before crawling out. His hands shook as he looked at the smartwatch again. The truth was now undeniable. His father's death had been staged and Masato was at the center of it. Ren copied the data to a flash drive, tucked it into his pocket and stared at the dark window where the city lights flickered like distant stars. Tomorrow they would bury a man who might still be alive, and he was the only one who could stop it. He stood there for a long time, listening to the wind outside before whispering into the empty room. I won't let them, Dad. You promised you'd call before leaving. I'm going to keep that promise for you. And as the night deepened around the silent house, the faint blue light of the smartwatch screen pulsed steadily, like a heartbeat that refused to fade. The morning of the funeral dawned gray and heavy, as if the sky itself refused to accept the news that Akihiro Ishikawa was gone. Ren awoke before sunrise, his thoughts tangled in half-formed questions and fading dreams. The house was too quiet. It felt wrong, stripped of its pulse. Even the familiar scent of machine oil that usually drifted from his father's study seemed to have vanished overnight. He lay still for a while, staring at the ceiling, trying to gather courage. There was no more time to doubt himself. If what he had seen on the smartwatch was true, then this entire funeral was a lie. But how could a 12-year-old boy prove it? Who would believe him over a grown man like Masato, with his calm voice and confident manner? Ren got up, dressed quietly, and crept downstairs. Masato was already in the living room, sitting at the low table with two men in dark suits. They stopped talking when Ren entered. Ah, Ren, Masato said smoothly, his smile practiced. You should eat something. The director has come to confirm the arrangements. The ceremony will be held tomorrow at the Yamadera Temple. His voice was respectful, but there was an edge beneath it, as if daring Ren to question him. The coffin will remain closed, he added. Your father wouldn't want anyone to see him like that. Ren lowered his eyes, pretending to nod, though inside he was screaming. The director offered him a polite bow, murmuring something about tradition, about dignity and death. Ren barely listened. All he could think about was the smartwatch hidden under his mattress upstairs and the strange pulse that had refused to die. Masato's voice droned on, but the words blurred into the background hum of deceit. Ren's hands clenched around the fabric of his trousers. His father wasn't in that coffin. He couldn't be. When the men left, Masato turned to him. I know this is difficult, he said, placing a heavy hand on Ren's shoulder. But after tomorrow, we'll have peace. Your father's work will continue, and I'll make sure you're taken care of. You can trust me, Ren. Trust. The word stung like acid. Ren met his uncle's eyes just long enough to see the flicker of calculation behind the mask of sympathy. Yes, uncle, he murmured, forcing his voice to remain steady. Masato smiled again and walked out to take a phone call, his tone instantly shifting to sharp business-like efficiency. Ren waited until the sound of his footsteps faded, then bolted upstairs to his room. He locked the door, pulled the smartwatch from its hiding place, and connected it to his computer. The data appeared as a series of graphs: heart rate, oxygen levels, temperature. The patterns confirmed what he had already seen. The heart rate had slowed dramatically, but never stopped. Then at 21:20, when the signal from the factory was lost, there was a brief spike at 22:15, the same time as the missed call. After that, nothing. The location tag attached to the last signal pointed once again to the Yokoyama industrial port. His father's watch had been there after the explosion. Someone had moved him. Someone who wanted everyone to think he was dead. He copied the files onto a new flash drive, labeled it only with the letter A, and tucked it inside the lining of his jacket. Then he began searching through his father's computer again, hoping to find more clues. The email between Akihiro and Masato still sat in the inbox, ominous and unfinished. But now Ren noticed something else. An encrypted folder labeled Private Aurora. He tried his father's old passwords, but none worked. After several failed attempts, a warning message appeared. One more try and the folder would lock permanently. Ren sighed in frustration. He didn't dare risk it. Outside, a low rumble of thunder rolled over the harbor. Rain began to patter softly against the window, blurring the city lights into streaks of gold. The sound brought back a memory, his father's voice telling him that rain was like time, soft, unstoppable, capable of wearing down even the hardest stone. Maybe, Ren thought, the truth worked the same way. Maybe he didn't need to break everything open at once. He only needed to keep going, little by little, until the cracks began to show. That evening, as the storm intensified, Masato announced he would be spending the night at the company office to finalize paperwork for the inheritance transfer. "The authorities want confirmation of next of kin," he explained. "It's just a formality." Ren nodded, hiding his relief. Once Masato left, he had the house to himself. He packed a flashlight, gloves, and the smartwatch into his backpack. He had one goal: to find where his father had truly been after the explosion. By midnight, the rain had turned into a steady curtain. Ren slipped out the back door, careful not to make a sound. The city slept, the streets glistening under streetlights. It took him nearly an hour to reach the ruins of the Kuragawa plant. Police tape fluttered weakly in the wind, but the site itself was unguarded now that the investigation was closed. The air still smelled faintly of burned plastic and chemicals. Ren climbed over the debris, his shoes slipping on wet concrete, until he reached what remained of the control room where his father had worked. He turned on his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing shattered glass and melted machinery. His throat tightened. This was where they said it had happened. He crouched near a pile of twisted metal and sifted through it carefully. Most of the electronics were unrecognizable, but something glinted faintly under the rubble. He reached for it and pulled out a small metal fragment, a piece of a watch strap. His heart leaped. The broken link matched the design of his father's smartwatch band. That meant the rest of it had been removed later. Someone had taken it. Someone who didn't want the data found. Ren pocketed the fragment and kept searching. Beneath a scorched table, he found a cracked tablet with the Kuragawa Systems logo still faintly visible. When he pressed the power button, the screen flickered weakly, then died. He slid it into his bag anyway. Perhaps it could be repaired. The sound of approaching footsteps froze him in place. He turned off the flashlight and ducked behind a collapsed beam. A pair of flashlights cut through the darkness. Two men in black raincoats moved through the wreckage, speaking in low voices. "Boss said everything was cleared," one muttered. "Why are we back here?" "Just double-checking," the other replied. "He doesn't want any evidence left. If the police start asking about the explosion again, it'll ruin the plan." Ren's pulse hammered. He pressed himself closer to the ground, afraid to even breathe. The men moved toward the center of the room, scanning the floor. "There was supposed to be a safe here," one said. "He used it for the Aurora schematics. Did you find it?" "Already taken," the other answered. "Transferred to the port 2 nights ago. Masato's orders." Ren bit his lip to keep from gasping. So it was true. The port again. His father's invention, his body, everything had been moved there. The men turned to leave, their flashlights sweeping dangerously close to his hiding spot. As they passed, he caught a glimpse of a company logo on their jackets. Kuragawa Security Division. His uncle's men. When the echoes of their footsteps faded, Ren crawled out, trembling but determined. The truth was no longer just suspicion. It was a living, breathing danger. He left the factory quietly and walked home through the rain. His shoes squelched with every step, his clothes soaked through, but he felt strangely alive. Fear and hope burned inside him like twin flames. He spent the rest of the night analyzing what he'd heard, piecing together the timeline. The explosion had been staged. His father had been taken to the port. Masato was hiding something, maybe even hiding him. But where at the port? It was huge warehouses, shipping containers, endless docks. He needed help. At school the next day, Ren barely heard the lessons. His mind was elsewhere. During lunch, he approached his homeroom teacher, Miss Ayame Sato, a woman in her 30s with sharp eyes and a quiet intelligence. She had once worked as a journalist before becoming a teacher, and she was the only adult Ren trusted enough to tell the truth. When the other students left the classroom, he lingered by her desk. "Miss Sato," he said softly, "can I talk to you about something? It's about my father." She studied his face, saw the exhaustion there, and nodded. "Of course, Ren. Let's go somewhere private." They sat in the library, hidden between rows of books. Ren told her everything: the smartwatch, the data, the missed call, the men at the factory. She listened without interrupting, her expression growing darker with every detail. When he finished, she folded her hands and spoke carefully. "You're very brave, Ren, and I believe you. But this is dangerous. If what you're saying is true, your uncle might be involved in something criminal. You can't confront him alone." "I don't want to," Ren said quickly, "but my father might still be alive. I can't just do nothing." Ayame nodded slowly. "I know someone who can help. He's a private investigator, a good one. He used to work with your father on a security project years ago. His name is Harada. I'll call him." Within an hour, they were sitting in a small cafe near the train station. Harada arrived wearing a long coat and a worn fedora, his sharp gaze scanning the room before he approached their table. He was in his late 50s, with deep lines around his eyes and a voice like gravel. "Ayame tells me you've got yourself a mystery, kid," he said, sliding into the seat across from Ren. "Let's hear it." Ren explained everything again, showing him the smartwatch data on his phone. Harada frowned, tapping the screen thoughtfully. "Heart rate never stops," he murmured. "This isn't consistent with death by explosion. If this is accurate, someone either faked the data or your father's alive." Ren's eyes lit up. "Can we prove it?" "Maybe," Harada said, "but we'll need more than this. The death certificate, autopsy report, anything official. If they're fake, that's our proof." Ayame promised to request copies from the local authorities under the pretense of helping the family with paperwork. By evening, she had them in her hands. Harada examined the documents closely, his brow furrowing. "The pathologist's signature is forged," he said finally, "and the report says the remains were identified through personal effects, not DNA. Classic setup. They never even had a body." Ren felt a surge of cold rage. Masato had lied to everyone. His father had been kidnapped, hidden away, while they planned to bury a lie. Harada leaned back, lighting a cigarette. "We'll need to move fast," he said. "Once they bury that coffin, it'll be harder to convince anyone to reopen the case." "When's the funeral?" "Tomorrow," Ren said quietly. Harada stubbed out the cigarette. "Then we've got one night to find where they took him. You said the smartwatch signal came from the port?" Ren nodded. Harada pulled out a folded map from his coat pocket. "There are only 3 warehouses at the Yokoyama Industrial Port with private security access. 2 belong to Kuragawa Systems. If I were hiding something or someone, I'd use the one farthest from the docks. Less traffic." They agreed to meet there at dawn. As Ren returned home under the fading light, a strange calm settled over him. Fear had turned into resolve. Tomorrow, while the world mourned his father's death, he would be fighting to prove his life. That night he lay awake, listening to the ticking clock, the sound of distant waves and the whisper of the wind against his window. The truth was close now, close enough to touch. Somewhere beyond the horizon of that dark harbor, his father was waiting, trapped in silence, and Ren would not let that silence last. The morning crept over Yokoyama like a tired ghost, painting the harbor in pale gray light. The air was damp and heavy, and the sea beyond the port walls looked like molten steel under a low sky. Ren hadn't slept at all. He had spent the long hours before dawn staring at the map Harada had drawn on a napkin, memorizing every line and name. 3 warehouses, 2 under Masato's company. One, the furthest from the main road, stood near the old shipyard, a place most workers avoided because of the crumbling docks. That was where Harada believed Akihiro Ishikawa had been taken. Ren had repeated the plan over and over in his head, clinging to it like a lifeline. They would go there, find proof, and stop the funeral before the lie became permanent. He met Miss Ayame and Harada at the small cafe again, though now it was nearly empty. A tired waitress wiped the counters while the smell of burnt coffee hung in the air. Harada looked just as he had the night before, tired but sharp, his eyes restless under the brim of his hat. "You didn't sleep," he said without preamble. Ren shook his head. "I couldn't. What if we're too late?" Harada gave a small grunt. "We won't be if we move fast. The funeral's at 11. That gives us a few hours. Ayame, you stay close to the boy. If anything goes wrong, you take him straight home." Ayame nodded, but her expression was firm. "I'm not letting either of you go alone. If Masato's behind this, He won't hesitate to silence anyone who gets in his way. They left the cafe just as the city began to stir. The streets were wet from the night rain, and the morning trains hummed in the distance. Herida's car was old, the kind that smelled faintly of tobacco and leather. As they drove toward the industrial district, Ren stared out the window, watching the familiar streets pass by, shops opening, people heading to work, unaware of the storm that brewed beneath the surface of their ordinary day. The port appeared slowly through the mist, cranes towering like metal giants over the rows of containers. The warehouses stood silent, their gray walls slick with moisture. Harida parked behind a line of trucks. "Stay close," he said, pulling out a small camera and a flashlight. "We're not breaking in unless we have to. First, we look for signs." They crossed the muddy ground, their footsteps muffled. The first warehouse was empty, filled only with piles of rusted equipment. The second was locked tight, its windows covered. Harida crouched beside the door and examined the lock. "Kuragawa Systems brand," he muttered. "Same model your father helped design. Figures." He smiled faintly. He built things that were too good for his own good. Ren didn't answer. His eyes were drawn to the far end of the port, where the third warehouse loomed like a sleeping beast. A red no-entry sign hung crookedly on the gate. One security guard sat in a booth nearby, flipping through a newspaper. Harida motioned for them to stay low. "That's the one," he whispered, "but we can't just walk in." Ayami frowned. "Then how?" Harida glanced toward the chain-link fence surrounding the lot. "Through the back. There's always a blind spot." They made their way around the perimeter, ducking behind stacks of crates. At one point, Ren tripped over a coil of rope, sending a small clatter echoing through the still air. They froze. The guard looked up, peering into the fog, but after a moment he shrugged and went back to his newspaper. Harida exhaled quietly and motioned them forward. Behind the warehouse, a section of fence was bent where the metal had rusted through. They slipped inside. The rear door was secured with a heavy padlock. Harida reached into his coat, producing a small set of picks. "Old habits die hard," he muttered, kneeling. A few seconds later, the lock clicked open. Inside, the air was cold and smelled faintly of chemicals. Dust hung in the narrow beams of light filtering through the high windows. Rows of crates stretched into the shadows, all marked with the company's logo. Ren's heart raced. He couldn't shake the feeling that his father was near, that if he called out, he might hear a reply. But Harida moved carefully, his flashlight cutting slow arcs through the gloom. "We're looking for anything unusual, medical equipment, sealed containers, maybe surveillance gear." Ayame walked to a metal cabinet and opened it. Inside were papers, invoices for shipments that didn't match the company's public records. "Harida," she said quietly, "these mention something called Project Aurora transported under hazardous material codes to private storage. Destination code, Port Facility C." Harida scanned the documents quickly. "Aurora again. That's what your father was fighting over." He slipped the papers into his coat. "We'll need these later." Ren wandered deeper into the warehouse, drawn by a faint humming sound. He followed it past a row of covered machinery until he found a crate with its lid slightly ajar. The hum came from inside. He pushed it open and gasped. Inside was a portable medical capsule, something between a hospital bed and a coffin, connected to dormant power cables. A faint chemical smell wafted from it. His father's name was printed on a tag, A. Ishikawa. "Harada," Ren called softly. The detective hurried over, eyes narrowing as he saw it. "So this is where they kept him," he muttered. "Stasis pod or something close. Keeps the body alive in a state of near suspension. Your father must have built it himself." Ren's throat tightened. "Then he's alive. He has to be." "Maybe," Harida said, "but he's not here now." He pointed to the cables. "They disconnected it recently. Whatever they did, they moved him again." Ayami looked toward the door. "Then he's probably still in the port, maybe in another container, waiting to be shipped." Harida pulled out his phone. "I can call in a favor at the police department. A friend of mine still owes me. If we can get a temporary search order before the funeral starts, we might find him." He stepped outside to make the call, leaving Ren and Ayame alone. Ren stared at the empty capsule, his hands trembling. "I knew it," he whispered. "He wasn't dead. He was right here." Ayami placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You were brave to follow your instincts, Ren. Most adults wouldn't have believed what you did. I just, he swallowed hard. I can't let them bury him while he's still alive. Harada returned a few minutes later, his expression grim but determined. I've got something. The police won't officially reopen the case yet, but my friend gave me the location of a private shipment scheduled for this morning. Container 412B, registered to Masato Ishikawa, destination overseas. If your father's being moved, that's our best chance. Ren's stomach twisted. The funeral starts soon. If they get him out of the country, they won't, Harada said. We'll get there first. They hurried back to the car. The drive from the warehouse to the main shipping yard took less than 10 minutes, but every second felt endless. The sky was darkening again, the promise of more rain heavy in the air. When they arrived, the yard was already alive with movement cranes lifting containers, workers shouting, forklifts humming. Harada flashed an old investigator's badge at the gate guard. Inspection, he said curtly. Security division. Need to verify contents of container 4112B. The guard hesitated, but Harada's tone brooked no argument. They were led to the far end of the yard where rows of shipping containers stretched toward the sea. When they reached the right number, Harada motioned for the guard to open it. The man fumbled with the keys, finally swinging the heavy doors open. Inside was another capsule identical to the one they had seen, but this one was sealed, powered, humming faintly. Ren rushed forward before anyone could stop him. Through the small glass panel, he saw a man's face pale, still, but unmistakably his father's. Dad, his voice broke. It's him. It's really him. Ayami covered her mouth, tears filling her eyes. Harada exhaled, relief and anger blending in his expression. He's alive, all right, and Masato was about to ship him like cargo. He turned to the guard. Get emergency services here now. The guard stared, stunned. Yes, sir. He ran off toward the office. Harada crouched beside the capsule, examining the control panel. He's in some kind of induced coma, he said. Oxygen levels are steady, pulse is weak, but they must have used a sedative that slows the heart to near death. That's how they faked it. Ren pressed his hand to the glass, whispering, I found you, Dad. I found you. The sound of footsteps interrupted them. Masato appeared at the far end of the row, flanked by two security men. His expression was icy calm. Well, he said, clapping slowly, I see the boy inherited his father's curiosity. And you, Harada, you just couldn't resist playing detective again, could you? Harada straightened, positioning himself between Masato and Ren. It's over, Masato. We've got enough to bury you twice over false reports, kidnapping, fraud. Masato's smile didn't waver. You think anyone will believe the word of a washed-up investigator and a hysterical child? The funeral's already starting. By the time anyone checks this place, that container will be gone, and you'll all be trespassers. But then sirens wailed in the distance, police, drawn by Harada's emergency call. Masato's expression faltered for the first time. He turned sharply to his men. Destroy the capsule! Ren lunged forward instinctively, but Harada grabbed him and pushed him back. One of Masato's men reached for a crowbar, but before he could strike, police cars roared into the yard, red lights flashing. Officers shouted commands surrounding them. Masato's men dropped their weapons immediately. Masato froze as two officers approached. Masato Ishikawa, one said, you're under arrest for obstruction of justice and attempted homicide. Masato's eyes flickered with fury, but he said nothing as they handcuffed him. He glanced once at Ren, his gaze full of something dark and unreadable, then turned away. Paramedics rushed to the capsule, checking Akihiro's vitals and preparing to move him. Harada and Ayami stood aside, letting them work. Ren followed close, holding his father's hand through the glass until they lifted the pod into an ambulance. He'll need medical care, one of the paramedics said gently. But he's alive. You did the right thing, kid. As the ambulance drove off, the rain began to fall again, soft and cold, washing the grime from the air. Harada placed a hand on Ren's shoulder. It's not over yet, he said quietly. We'll need to make sure the truth comes out, but your father's safe now. That's what matters. Ren looked toward the disappearing ambulance lights, his heart aching with relief. He kept his promise, he whispered. He said he'd always call before leaving, and he did. They stood there for a long time in the rain, watching the last of the chaos fade. The morning that had begun with despair ended with the fragile, undeniable pulse of hope. And as the sirens faded into the distance, Ren knew one thing for certain. This was not the end of their story, but the beginning of their fight to bring everything into the light. The rain did not stop that morning. It fell in long, whispering sheets over the city of Yokoyama, blurring its edges until everything, the buildings, the trees, even the sea, seemed to dissolve into one trembling reflection. By the time Ren and Harada reached the Yamadera temple, the funeral had already begun. The courtyard was crowded with mourners holding black umbrellas, their faces solemn, their voices low. The air was thick with incense and grief. But for Ren, there was only disbelief. The person they were about to bury was not dead. His father was alive, lying in a hospital bed, breathing weakly but real. The world outside did not know yet. Harada's car stopped a short distance away, out of sight of the temple gates. "Are you sure about this, kid?" he asked, his hand still resting on the wheel. "Once we walk in there, we're not just interrupting a funeral, we're exposing a lie in front of the whole city." Ren's fingers tightened around the small flash drive in his pocket. On it were all the files from his father's smartwatch, the emails, the photographs of the capsule at the port, and the voice recording of Masato's conversation with his men. He had everything now, proof that the explosion was staged, that his father had been drugged and hidden. "I'm sure," Ren said quietly. "They're burying an empty coffin. If I don't stop it now, no one ever will." Ayame sat in the back seat, watching the rain streak down the window. "The police have Masato in custody," she said, "but the public doesn't know yet. The report won't go out until this afternoon. If we don't act now, his story will become the truth." Harada nodded slowly. "Then we'll make sure the right truth takes its place." He looked at Ren in the rearview mirror. "Stay behind me until I give the signal. When you speak, speak clearly. They'll try to silence you with confusion, but you've got the facts. Facts don't bow to fear." Ren met his eyes and nodded. He was trembling inside, but there was no turning back. They stepped out into the rain. The temple bells were tolling as they climbed the long stone steps, each chime echoing across the courtyard like a slow heartbeat. Monks in saffron robes stood beneath the eaves, chanting softly. At the front of the courtyard, beneath a canopy, stood the casket-polished black wood adorned with white lilies. Masato was nowhere in sight, but Ren recognized several company executives gathered near the altar, their heads bowed, their expressions grim and rehearsed. The priest raised his hand for silence. "We are gathered to bid farewell to Akihiro Ishikawa," he intoned, "a man of vision and integrity, whose work has shaped our city and whose sacrifice shall not be forgotten." Ren's vision swam. Sacrifice. The word made him sick. His father had not sacrificed anything. He had been betrayed. He took a step forward, but Harada placed a steadying hand on his shoulder. "Wait," he whispered. The priest continued the ritual, his voice blending with the rain. When he finally gestured for Masato's assistant to bring forth the incense bowl, Harada gave a barely perceptible nod. "Now." Ren stepped forward. His shoes splashed in the puddles as he crossed the courtyard. Heads turned. The murmuring began almost immediately. A boy in dark clothes soaked from the rain, walking straight toward the altar with his head held high. He stopped in front of the casket. For a moment he said nothing. The silence deepened until the only sound was the rain drumming on the roof and the soft hiss of incense smoke. Then Ren took a breath and spoke. "This funeral is a lie." The words fell like stones into the silence. Gasps rippled through the crowd. The priest blinked in confusion. One of the company men stepped forward. "What did you say, boy?" Ren looked up, his eyes burning. "I said this is a lie. My father isn't dead. You're burying an empty box." A collective murmur rose, sharp and disbelieving. Someone laughed nervously. Another whispered, "It's grief." The boy's lost his mind. Harada moved to stand beside Ren, his expression cold and controlled. "The boy isn't mistaken," he said. "We have evidence." "Who are you?" one of the executives demanded. "Detective Harada," he replied, "former criminal investigator. And this," he gestured to Ren, "is Akihiro Ishikawa's son. He's here because the man you claim to mourn is lying in a hospital alive, sedated and hidden by his own brother. Masato Ishikawa. The crowd erupted. Voices clashed, people craned their necks. The priest tried to quiet them, but failed. The rain intensified, as if the sky itself had chosen to bear witness. Ren's heart pounded, but he kept going. Masato faked the explosion. He drugged my father and kept him in a capsule at the port. He wanted to take his work project Aurora and sell it, but he failed. The police have already arrested him. You can call them and check. And if you don't believe me, open the casket. The priest hesitated, looking toward the company directors. They shook their heads, muttering about blasphemy and disrespect. But Harada's voice cut through the noise like a blade. If you refuse, I'll have a court order here within the hour. Which will look worse, stopping now or being caught on the evening news staging a funeral for an empty box? That silenced them. One of the monks stepped forward reluctantly, placing his hand on the casket lid. The wood creaked as it lifted. Gasps filled the courtyard again, then screams. The coffin was empty except for a weighted mannequin wrapped in white cloth. The priest stumbled back. The executives went pale. Reporters who had come to cover the ceremony surged forward, cameras clicking furiously. "Is this true?" someone shouted. "Where's the body?" Harada didn't answer. He simply turned to Ren. "Show them." Ren pulled the flash drive from his pocket and held it up. "This contains everything," he said, his voice shaking but clear. "The proof of what my uncle did. The recordings, the emails, the location data from my father's smartwatch. You all thought this was a tragedy. It was a crime." The sound of police sirens grew louder beyond the gates. Officers arrived moments later, pushing through the crowd. Their captain approached Harada, saluted briefly, and whispered something in his ear. Harada nodded. "Masato Ishikawa is in custody," he announced. "He confessed to the plot earlier this morning. The man you mourn is alive under medical supervision at Yokoyama General Hospital." The crowd fell silent again. Then slowly the whispers began to shift from disbelief to relief, from confusion to anger. The company directors exchanged panicked looks as reporters surrounded them. The priest sank to his knees, muttering prayers under his breath. Ren stood motionless in the center of it all, staring at the empty coffin. For a long time he couldn't breathe. The sight of it, so dark, so hollow, felt like looking into the heart of the lie that had nearly destroyed everything. He whispered to himself, "You're coming home, Dad." Ayami appeared beside him, her umbrella trembling slightly in her hands. "It's over, Ren," she said softly. "You did it." But Harada shook his head. "Not yet. It's only over when the truth is told." By afternoon, the story had spread across every network. "Funeral without a body," the headlines read. "Engineer found alive. Brother arrested." Cameras flooded the hospital, journalists camped outside the Ishikawa home, and messages poured in from across the country. Shock, sympathy, outrage. The company's board called an emergency meeting, announcing that all of Masato's holdings were frozen pending investigation. Meanwhile, in a quiet hospital room overlooking the Gray Sea, Akihiro Ishikawa opened his eyes for the first time in weeks. The machines beside his bed beeped steadily. His lips moved, forming a name before any sound came out. "Ren!" When Ren entered, his father's hand twitched weakly toward him. The boy rushed forward, clasping it tightly. "Dad, it's me," he whispered. "You're safe now. They can't hurt you anymore." Akihiro's eyes were sunken, his face pale. But when he saw his son's face, he smiled faintly. "You found me." Ren nodded, tears spilling freely now. "I never stopped looking." Ayami and Harada stood quietly at the door, watching the reunion. The detective's usual sternness softened for once. "He's got more courage than most men I've met," he said quietly. Ayami smiled. "He got it from his father." Over the next few days, the truth unfolded piece by piece. Masato's confession confirmed everything. He had conspired to fake the explosion after Akihiro refused to hand over the blueprints for Project Aurora AI system capable of controlling large-scale energy networks remotely. Masato had intended to sell it to a foreign defense contractor. To eliminate opposition, he hired men to stage the explosion, administer a paralytic to his brother, and hide him in a medical capsule. The plan was to declare him dead, take control of the company, and eventually transport the capsule abroad to ensure silence. But he hadn't counted on a 12-year-old boy refusing to believe what he was told. The trial that followed drew national attention. Ren testified calmly, describing the events from the night of the explosion to the moment the coffin was opened. The courtroom fell silent as he played the recording of Masato's voice ordering his men to get rid of the capsule. Harada provided his investigation files, and Ayami confirmed the timeline. When the verdict was read, there was no surprise. Masato Ishikawa was sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. After the trial, reporters tried to corner Ren outside the courthouse, asking how it felt to have brought down such a powerful man. He simply said, "I didn't bring anyone down. I brought my father back." The words echoed far beyond Yokoyama. News programs called him the boy who refused to believe. Letters poured in from strangers, some thanking him for reminding them of hope, others sharing stories of loss and perseverance. But Ren avoided the cameras. He only wanted to be with his father, who was slowly regaining his strength. One evening, as the sun set over the sea, they sat together on the hospital balcony. The air was cool, the light turning the waves gold. Akihiro's voice was still weak but steady. "You saved me, Ren. I owe you my life." Ren shook his head. "You don't owe me anything. You taught me to listen when something doesn't feel right." "I just did what you taught me," his father smiled faintly. "I always said a promise is a bridge, not a word. You crossed it for both of us." They sat in silence after that, watching the first stars appear. The city below buzzed with life, unaware of the quiet triumph taking place above it. For Ren, the nightmare was over, but something inside him had changed forever. He had seen what truth could do, how fragile it was, how easily buried, and how powerful when it broke through the darkness. The next day, as he left the hospital, he passed a group of children playing by the gate. One of them pointed at him and whispered, "That's the boy who saved his dad." Ren smiled shyly but said nothing. He didn't feel like a hero. He was just a son who kept a promise. That night he lay in bed, the house finally peaceful again. His phone sat on the nightstand beside him. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't afraid to close his eyes. Just as he began to drift into sleep, the phone buzzed once. He opened his eyes, heart racing, and then he saw the name on the screen. "Dad." He answered, and his father's voice, still soft and tired, came through. "Just checking in, Ren. I'll always call before I leave." Ren laughed through his tears. "I know, Dad. I know." Outside, the rain had stopped, and the sea wind carried the faint sound of temple bells from across the city bells that no longer tolled for death, but for life rediscovered, truth restored, and a promise kept. The winter sun rose pale and uncertain over Yokoyama, casting thin silver light across the hospital courtyard. A faint layer of frost glazed the branches of the cherry trees, and the world seemed caught between silence and awakening. Inside room 412, Akihiro Ishikawa sat propped against his pillows, his skin still wan but his eyes alive again. Weeks had passed since his rescue, yet each morning still felt unreal. The machines that once monitored his every heartbeat had been removed, leaving only a faint line of adhesive marks on his wrist. Beside the bed sat Ren, reading aloud from a tattered science magazine. His voice carried a quiet pride that hadn't been there before, the tone of someone who had seen too much and understood more than his years allowed. When Ren paused, Akihiro smiled. "You've been keeping me up to date on every new invention. You'll leave me behind if you keep studying like this." Ren looked up. "You used to say knowledge only matters if you use it for something good." "And I still believe that," Akihiro said softly, "though I nearly lost everything trying to protect that belief." The room fell into a thoughtful silence. The memory of what had happened still lingered between them, the deception, the fear, the coffin that held nothing but a lie. Yet it no longer felt like a wound. It was something they had survived together, something that bound them more tightly than before. Outside, the city moved on. News of the scandal had settled into history. The name Masato Ishikawa, now spoken only in court reports and financial audits. The trial had ended decisively. The evidence Ren, Ayame, and Harada had gathered left no room for doubt. Masato's empire of deceit collapsed overnight. The company's assets were seized, his co-conspirators arrested, and his sentence life imprisonment without parole was announced with solemn finality. The man who had once stood on stages speaking of progress and innovation now faced a future defined by iron bars and silence. Akihiro had followed the news from his hospital bed without bitterness. "He was my brother," he said one evening, as if to himself. "But greed changes people. It makes them believe they can rewrite the truth." Ren had wanted to hate Masato, but when he looked at his father's tired face, he realized hatred only made wounds deeper. "He won't hurt anyone again," he said quietly. "That's enough." It took another month before the doctors allowed Akihiro to leave the hospital. The day he was discharged, the staff lined the corridor, offering warm farewells. The story of the engineer who had come back from the dead had inspired many. Outside, Ayami and Harada were waiting. The detective's coat looked even more worn than before, and Ayami held a small bouquet of white lilies. "You made it, old friend," Harada said with a grin. "Didn't think I'd see you walking out of there on your own 2 feet. Akihiro laughed weakly. "You did more than most doctors, Harada." "I should have known you'd still be too stubborn to retire." Ayami handed him the flowers. "These are for you and for Ren. The world needs reminders that courage isn't just something found in books." Ren blushed and looked down. "I just didn't want to lose him." Harada ruffled his hair. "That's exactly why you didn't." They took the train home together, the city flashing by outside the window. The Ishikawa house had been repaired during Akihiro's absence, though many of his tools were still packed away. When they stepped inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and dust. The workshop lights flickered to life, illuminating shelves lined with models, circuit boards, and designs from another life. Akihiro paused at the doorway, his gaze sweeping over everything he had built. "It's strange," he said. "This room used to mean my work. Now it just feels like a place I almost never came back to." Ren set down his father's bag. "Then maybe we should build something new." In the weeks that followed, they did exactly that. The once quiet house filled with activity again, visitors, letters, proposals, all offering Akihiro chances to return to industry. But he declined each one politely. The company was left in the hands of his trusted colleagues, men and women who had stood by him when Masato's betrayal came to light. Instead, Akihiro turned his attention elsewhere. He had seen what greed and ambition could do when untethered by conscience. He wanted to create something that healed instead of divided. He and Ren began drafting plans for a foundation, a place that would help children who had lost parents to crime or corruption. They called it the Sunrise Foundation. "Because every sunrise is a second chance," Akihiro said when the papers were signed. It began as a small initiative, supported by donations and volunteers, but quickly grew. Ren designed the foundation's emblem, a stylized sun rising over an open bridge. It was his idea to use the motto his father had repeated since he was small. "A promise is a bridge, not a word." Ayame became one of the foundation's advisors, helping manage educational programs, while Harada offered his services as a security consultant. "You'll need someone to keep the wolves away," he said half-jokingly. But everyone knew it was true. Every light attracts a shadow. The months passed quietly. Akihiro's strength returned, though his hair had turned more silver than black, and his hands trembled slightly when he worked. Ren, on the other hand, seemed to grow faster than time allowed. He still built drones and machines, but his designs now bore a different spirit, less about control, more about protection. He said he wanted to finish what his father had started, but in his own way. One evening in early spring, as they walked through the park near the harbor, they passed the spot where the ruins of the Kuragawa plant had once stood. The land was cleared now, surrounded by scaffolding and workers. A sign announced the construction of a new facility, the Second Chance Home, built under the patronage of the Sunrise Foundation. Ren stopped, staring through the fence at the workers lifting beams against the sunset. "I remember when this place was smoke and fire," he said quietly. Akihiro placed a hand on his shoulder. "Now it'll be a place where children can start again. That's the best way to rebuild something broken. Make it mean something better." Ren smiled faintly. "It doesn't even look like the same world anymore." "Maybe that's because we learned to see it differently," his father replied. They continued walking until the lights of the city shimmered on the water. For a long time, neither spoke. It was enough just to be together, to breathe the same air, to feel the steady rhythm of life moving forward. The opening ceremony for the Second Chance home took place that summer. The building stood tall and bright where ashes once lay, its walls painted in warm earth tones, its windows reflecting the sea. Reporters came again, but this time not for scandal. They came to witness renewal. Wren gave a short speech before the gathered crowd, his voice steady despite the tremor of emotion beneath it. My father once told me that truth isn't something you find, it's something you protect. This place was born from truth that tried to be buried, but wasn't. For everyone who's lost someone, for everyone who's been told to stop hoping, this is for you. Applause broke out, but Wren barely heard it. He looked over at his father sitting in the front row, pride shining in his eyes. When the ribbon was cut, the crowd began to tour the facility, and laughter echoed through the halls for the first time. Later that evening, when the guests had gone and the sky had turned violet, Wren wandered through the garden behind the building. At its center stood a young tree planted that morning. Beneath it lay a simple stone plaque engraved with a single line, "From silence, life begins again." He knelt to touch the cool stone, feeling the rough edges beneath his fingers. "We did it, Dad," he whispered. "It's really over." A voice behind him said gently, "No, Wren, it's just beginning." Akihiro had come to stand beside him, leaning slightly on his cane. The fading sunlight caught the lines on his face, softening them. "What you've done will outlast both of us. That's what real promises are for." They walked home together through the quiet streets. The city lights flickered in the puddles left by an earlier rain, and the air smelled faintly of salt and flowers. When they reached the house, Akihiro paused by the door and looked up at the sky. "Do you remember the last thing I said to you before the explosion?" Wren nodded. "You said you'd always call before leaving." Akihiro smiled. "Then I'd better keep that promise." That night, after Wren had gone to bed, the old phone on his nightstand buzzed once, exactly at 9 o'clock. The familiar ringtone filled the room, gentle and steady. Wren smiled as he answered. His father's voice came through the line, soft but sure. "Good night, Wren. Sleep well." "Good night, Dad," he whispered. "I will." When the call ended, Wren lay back and listened to the rain beginning again outside, light and rhythmic. Somewhere beyond the clouds, the sun waited to rise again. The bridge between them, the one built on faith, truth, and love, would never break. And so the Ishikawa house, once a place of sorrow, became a home of beginnings. The world outside continued to change, as all worlds do, but within its walls the clock ticked in gentle harmony, marking not the end of things, but the start of everything that was yet to come. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next chapters and future stories. You can also check out other videos on the channel. There's plenty more waiting for you. And if this story moved you, share it with your friends. It really helps the channel grow and brings more people into our community. See you in the next video.